Before we begin, if you haven't already signed up, take this opportunity to join our community and stay up to date on stories that will change the way you see the world. Don't miss any updates. Sign up now. In a luxurious Manhattan neighborhood, surrounded by mansions and tree-lined streets, lived Eleanor Cartwright, a 75-year-old woman whose life seemed a portrait of success. Owner of one of the largest cosmetics companies in the country, Eleanor had achieved more than anyone could imagine. But her wealth and prestige could not fill the void she felt inside. What more could the Cartwright family matriarch need? Her only son, William, had died 3 years earlier in a car accident. The pain of the loss was still fresh, something that no amount of money or expert advice could erase. She spent her days wandering the empty corridors of the mansion, looking at old photos, remembering a time when her life had meaning. It was on one of those lonely afternoons that something unexpected happened. Eleanor was in a cafe in downtown Manhattan when her eyes met those of a young stranger. He was sitting at a nearby table, fiddling with his phone, but it was what she saw in his face that took her breath away. His eyes were the same as William's, the same smile, the same expression. It was as if her son were there, alive, before her. She felt a chill down her spine, and for a moment thought she might be delirious. Was the pain playing tricks on her mind? But no. Something inside her told her there was more to that young man than a mere superficial resemblance. Something inexplicable, yet real. She stood up, walked over to him, and without knowing what she was doing said, "I know who you are." The young man looked at her with a confused expression, but didn't look away. What could have been a simple coincidence quickly turned into a disturbing moment. Eleanor, agitated, explained that he looked exactly like her deceased son. The young man's reaction was a mixture of surprise and a pang of discomfort. But before he could answer, Eleanor was already asking him to take a DNA test. She didn't know what else she could do, but that sight, that look, couldn't be ignored. If he really was someone important, perhaps, who knows, a lost relative, a piece of a puzzle she never imagined existed. The young man, named Adam Walker, was as bewildered as Eleanor. He didn't know what to think, but faced with the woman's insistence, he agreed to the test. What he didn't know was that, by doing so, he would set in motion a series of events that would forever alter both their lives and reveal secrets Eleanor never imagined about William's past. Eleanor Cartwright never had time to wonder what could have been. Her life was always occupied with work and responsibilities, but her mind was always focused on her son, who had been her greatest source of love and pride. William was the center of her world, and his sudden death left her with a void difficult to fill. William's will was clear. The company should be passed on to her, but she knew she would never have the joy of seeing him grow and realize his own dreams. However, her pain was more than the loss of a son. It was the loss of a part of herself, of her identity. Adam, on the other hand, had a completely different story. Born in a small town in rural Michigan, he grew up far from the luxuries of urban life. His parents, ordinary workers, always encouraged him to follow his own path, away from the eyes of society. Adam didn't care about money or appearances. For him, life was always about genuine human experience, not the glitter of riches. The coincidence that united Adam and Eleanor, the resemblance between him and William, seemed impossible. Adam knew that his biological mother had died when he was very young, but what he didn't know was that his life was about to be turned upside down. He was raised by his maternal grandmother, a stern and rigid woman who never spoke about her family's past. What Adam didn't understand was why his grandmother never spoke fondly of his mother, as if there were something dark in her family's past. The DNA test requested by Eleanor was still underway, and Adam wondered what it would reveal. If she was right, and he really was William's son, how would that change his life? What did it mean for him? Even more so, what did it mean for Eleanor, who was now on the brink of a new mystery. She wondered if there was something hidden in William's past, something she had never known, something that might explain the striking resemblance between Adam and her deceased son. The tension between them deepened as the days passed. Eleanor felt trapped in a web of conflicting emotions. Her desire to know the truth about Adam consumed her, but at the same time, the idea of such a deep secret within her own family terrified her. She wanted to believe that the young man was, in fact, her long-lost grandson, but her reason remained skeptical. She knew something wasn't right, that the coincidence between the two was too great to be mere chance. Adam, for his part, couldn't ignore the feelings of confusion he felt. Something in the way Eleanor treated him, something in her eyes, made him question his own memories. He had never known much about his biological mother, but the idea that she might have been part of such a rich and powerful family made him uncomfortable. He feared that if the test confirmed the blood relationship, his simple and quiet life would be replaced by a whirlwind of expectations, money, and family intrigues. Days passed until the DNA test results arrived. Both were nervous, but for different reasons. Eleanor, with a nervousness she rarely displayed, hoped the test would only be a confirmation. Adam, torn between the desire to know the truth and the fear of the implications that truth might bring, was tense. When the results came in, both of their worlds were turned upside down. The envelope containing the DNA test results was still on the table between Eleanor and Adam. They both stared at it with a mixture of anxiety and apprehension. Eleanor felt the weight of the moment, as if she were at a crossroads that could change everything in her life. She knew that, regardless of the result, something big would happen, but she didn't know exactly what. Adam's eyes were fixed on the paper, but he couldn't do anything but wait. He knew that if the test confirmed what Eleanor believed, his life would change forever. The story of his mother, of his own origins, would come to light in ways he never imagined. The pain and uncertainty he felt seemed to choke his words. He thought of his grandmother, how she always protected him from the past, but also kept him away from something much bigger than he could comprehend. Eleanor, for her part, had begun to doubt her own decision. The idea of opening the doors to William's past, something she had already buried, was beginning to seem more like a curse than a blessing. She already felt responsible for her own pain, and now, with the possibility that the young man before her was actually her lost grandson, she feared the impact this would have on her life and the dynamics of the Cartwright family. More than anything, she feared what it would reveal about her son, William, and his possible connection to something dark. Finally, Adam, unable to bear the silence any longer, picked up the envelope and opened it. Eleanor's eyes were fixed on him, but he took a moment to process what he was seeing. The DNA test confirmed what Eleanor had suspected. He was, in fact, William Cartwright's son. Eleanor didn't know how to react. She wanted to feel joy, like any grandmother would feel upon learning that a grandchild had appeared in her life, but the truth was, she felt more fear than anything else. What did this mean for the Cartwright family? What did it mean for her? The wealth, the secrets, the history she thought she understood were now becoming far more complex. "So it's true," she murmured, almost in a whisper. Adam looked at her with a mixture of anger and confusion. "I'm not here to take anything from you, Mrs. Cartwright. I just want to know who I am, who my mother was. Why is all this happening now?" Adam's words sent a chill down the spine. He seemed to be speaking angrily, but the pain in his eyes was clear. Eleanor didn't know what to say, but a feeling of guilt settled in her chest. The DNA test didn't answer all the questions. It only brought more to the surface. Who was Adam's mother? Why had she never spoken about the Cartwright family? And most importantly, what did she have to do with all of this? What neither of them knew was that William's past held something deeper. Something that not even Eleanor knew. The story behind what happened between William and Adam's mother was about to be revealed, But before that happened, Eleanor and Adam needed to confront the truth of their own lives. Looking into Eleanor's eyes, Adam sensed the urgency of an answer, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. The man he thought was his father was now dead, and all that remained was a wealthy and powerful woman who seemed even more lost than he was. They couldn't go back now. The secret that bound their families was about to be exposed. The tension between the two was at its peak, and the weight of the truth hung over them like a shadow. But there was something more, a discovery that could change everything, not only their relationship, but also the power dynamics surrounding the Cartwrights. They didn't yet know that what bound them was much more than a simple DNA test. As Eleanor and Adam's world was shaken by the revelation of the DNA test, other issues began to emerge from the shadows, threatening to further destabilize their lives. Eleanor, though a strong and unflappable woman in the business world, couldn't ignore the echoes of a past that was beginning to return with force. An old letter, which she had received years before, suddenly appeared on her desk, a letter she had never dared to open. She picked it up, hesitated for a moment, and then, with a trembling hand, tore off the seal. The letter was written by someone claiming to be a former lover of William's. The person mentioned a woman he had been involved with, someone from a past Eleanor was completely unaware of. The words indicated that William had had a secret relationship, a relationship with a woman Eleanor had never known existed. The letter not only confirmed that he had been involved with another person, but suggested that he had left something far more important behind, a child, and possibly a parallel life, a hidden reality Eleanor had never known. With the letter in her hands, Eleanor felt a whirlwind of emotions. The betrayal she felt now stemmed not only from the fact that William had hidden a part of his life, but also from the revelation that he might have taken that secret to the grave. The pain she felt was deeper than the loss of a child. It was the pain of a life built on lies. Adam, on the other hand, struggled with a growing sense of unease. Not only had he discovered he was William Cartwright's son, but now he was being dragged into a world he didn't understand. The questions about his biological mother intensified, and he knew that the answer was directly linked to Eleanor. But what he didn't know was that this search would lead him to a past darker than he had ever imagined. Adam's grandmother, who had always been rigid and reserved, began to show signs of concern. She had never spoken about Adam's father, but she knew more about him than she let on. When Adam began pressing her for answers, she became even more withdrawn. What was at stake for her? Why did his grandmother keep so many secrets? What was the true connection between her and William Cartwright? What did she know about his mother and the Cartwright family's past that she had never revealed? Meanwhile, Eleanor also began to realize that the pressure on her was mounting. Her own children, heirs to her fortune, were beginning to question what was happening. They noticed the disturbance in Eleanor's behavior and were aware of the conversations about William's mysterious grandson. Her eldest daughter, Grace, an ambitious and ruthless woman, soon began asking uncomfortable questions, seeking to understand how this would affect the future of the Cartwright family and her mother's business. For Grace, any threat to the stability of her inheritance would be unacceptable. Tension between Eleanor and Grace grew as the mother began to be drawn into a past she preferred to leave buried. William's secret not only shook her relationship with Adam, but also jeopardized the Cartwright family legacy, built with so much effort and dedication. Grace, seeing that William's story might be more complicated than she imagined, began to devise a plan to ensure her position in her mother's inheritance was not threatened. And she knew that if Adam was truly who Eleanor believed him to be, it could change everything. Eleanor, no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, began to realize she had no control over the situation. Her past was back, more complicated and darker than she had ever imagined. What would she do now? How would she protect her family and her legacy without destroying the truth she so feared discovering? Meanwhile, Adam, in his search for answers, began to learn more about William's life. He discovered that the connection with Eleanor, though solid, was also marked by secrets and choices made in the shadows. The truth about his mother and William's involvement with her was further away than he imagined, but something in Adam's search indicated that he was getting closer to understanding the ties between their families and the mystery that was finally beginning to unfold. The tension between the characters intensified. Unresolved secrets, fragile alliances, and past choices began to intertwine, creating a web of complications that they would all have to face once William's past was finally in plain sight. The revelation about William Cartwright's past, the family tensions, and the growing mystery surrounding Adam took an unexpected turn when, on a quiet night, Eleanor received a visit. It was late at night, and she was alone in her house, reflecting on everything that had happened in the last few weeks. The DNA test, the forgotten letter, the pressure from her children, and above all, Adam's constant presence in her life, brought to light a reality she never wanted to face. The doorbell rang. When Eleanor opened the door, she found not just one person, but an imposing man, dressed in black, who seemed to radiate an aura of authority. He introduced himself as Michael Stone, a lawyer specializing in inheritance and family matters. His presence was intimidating, and Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. "Mrs. Cartwright," he said in a grave voice, "I need to talk to you about William Cartwright's will." Eleanor didn't know what to expect, but something in his tone made her heart beat faster. Without hesitation, she invited Michael in, trying to disguise the growing tension in her chest. As they sat down, Michael explained the reason for his visit. "There's something you still don't know about William's will. Something very important that he decided to keep hidden for reasons you need to understand now." Those words hit her like a bomb. Eleanor, stunned, tried to process what he was saying. "William had made a secret will, a document he wrote shortly before he died," Michael continued, looking at her with a serious expression. "In that will, he not only acknowledged Adam as his son, but also left a significant portion of his fortune to him." Eleanor was silent for a moment, Michael's words echoing in her mind. She knew William had been a man of secrets, but this was something she never imagined. "That can't be true," she murmured, more to herself than to Michael. But the lawyer, impassive, handed her a copy of the secret will, now registered at the notary's office, signed and dated. Eleanor took the document with trembling hands and read it quickly. Her heart raced as the words became clearer. In his will, William had explicitly stated that Adam was his legitimate son, the product of a relationship he had with a woman outside of marriage. Moreover, he had left a considerable fortune to the young man, including shares in the Cartwright Cosmetics Company, a portion of the family estate, and even a trust fund to ensure Adam had a prosperous future. Eleanor felt a mixture of anger and despair. What she was reading seemed like a profound betrayal. How could William have done something like this? How had he hidden it from her, his wife, for so many years? She couldn't understand. "Why did he do that?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion. Michael, with a serious look, replied, "He feared that if you knew of Adam's existence before his death, it would cause irreparable damage to the Cartwright family. Believe me, he did it to protect you in a twisted way, but it was the only way he saw to keep everything a secret. He knew the truth would be too hard to bear, but for Eleanor, the pain was too much. Not just the loss of her son, but the pain of being excluded from such a vital part of William's life. The betrayal was eating her up inside. She had lived so many years believing she knew everything about him, that she knew him intimately. But now she found herself confronted with a raw and devastating truth. Meanwhile, Adam, for his part, felt his world was crumbling. During the night, upon returning to the apartment where he was staying, he received a call from Michael, who asked him to meet immediately. When he arrived at the lawyer's office, the impact of the revelation was equally profound. He was aware of some things about his father, but he never imagined he would be entitled to such a large inheritance. "What does this mean for me?" Adam asked, feeling more lost than ever. "It means you're now a Cartwright, legally recognized. Your life will be very different from now on." Michael looked at him with a forced smile. "But it all depends on how you choose to handle it." The truth had come out, but now the question remained. How would Eleanor, Adam, and even the other members of the Cartwright family deal with it? Everyone's fate was intertwined with difficult choices and even more complex revelations. The weight of the revelations was beginning to be felt in every corner of Eleanor and Adam's lives. From the moment William's secret came to light, nothing would ever be the same again. Eleanor was stunned, unable to process everything immediately. The love of her life, William, had kept this secret until his death. She knew the will had been written to protect her, but that didn't make the pain of betrayal any less intense. The idea that he had a parallel life, a secret family, was a difficult blow to digest. But now, what was left for her? What could she do with this truth, with this new role she would have to play? Eleanor's reaction was a mixture of anger and sadness. The anger stemmed from the feeling of having been left in the dark, excluded from such a crucial part of her husband's life. But there was also a profound sadness, a loss that was even greater than the loss of William. It was the loss of trust, of the certainty that she knew and understood every aspect of him. She found herself forced to confront her own fragility. Although she had lived with the feeling of being in control, the owner of an immense fortune, she now realized that her life was not as solid as she thought. She didn't know who else might have lied to her, or what else might be hidden. The walls she had built around herself began to crumble. Grace, her eldest daughter, was the first to notice the changes in her mother. Eleanor had always considered her a woman of strong and firm character, but now Grace felt that the throne upon which she was balancing was about to crumble. She began to ask questions about Adam's inheritance and the future of the Cartwright family, trying to understand if there was any way to reverse what was happening. "Mom, you can't let this happen. This Adam, he's a complete stranger. He doesn't belong in our family," Grace said, her voice low but with a tone heavy with urgency. "If you allow him access to everything William has built, it could destroy our reputation, our name." But Eleanor could no longer listen. The weight of losing her husband and the betrayal was so great that she was no longer willing to give in to her daughter's pressure. She no longer wanted to live according to what others expected of her. She felt she should honor William's will, even if it meant facing a new reality she could never have imagined. On the other hand, Adam, although in an unexpected and surreal situation, also began to grapple with his own emotions. He felt his life had changed forever, but at the same time, something within him rebelled against the idea of being forced to fit into a life he never asked for. He didn't know if he wanted the wealth and status that had been left to him. The truth about his biological mother still haunted him, and he felt that by entering the Cartwright world, he would lose the identity he had built up until then. Adam's reaction was not one of gratitude for the inheritance, but of uncertainty and confusion. He still didn't know if he could trust Eleanor, if she was truly acting in his best interests, or if she merely saw him as a solution to a missing part of her own life. William's will, instead of being a bridge to a new life, seemed like just another chain binding him to a past he didn't understand. At home, his grandmother began to behave strangely. When Adam mentioned the will and the inheritance, she didn't respond, only turned her face away, avoiding looking at him. She knew more than he imagined, but somehow she had never told him the truth. She had lived her whole life with the weight of this secret, and now she was about to see it all crumble. While Eleanor and Adam weathered the emotional storm the truth had unleashed, societal pressure also mounted. News about William Cartwright's lost grandson began to spread. Newspapers were filled with stories about Adam's wealthy inheritance and the Cartwright family's complicated situation. Some saw the story as an opportunity to criticize the powerful matriarch of the family, while others were fascinated by the idea of a secret that had been kept for so long. The media quickly seized upon the situation, creating a sensationalist spectacle that only made things more difficult for Eleanor and Adam. For Eleanor, the blow was even more profound, as she had so skillfully built her public image over the years. The revelation that William had fathered a child out of wedlock threatened not only her family, but also her standing in the business world. Now she faced a difficult choice: deal with the consequences of the past, or try to erase everything that had been revealed. The future of the Cartwright family was uncertain, and Eleanor knew that, more than ever, she would need to make a crucial decision about how she would face what was to come. Eleanor, who had always been a woman of absolute control, now found herself in an emotional and familial whirlwind. The weight of the revelations and the reaction of her children, especially Grace, forced her to rethink her own beliefs and values. The story she believed she had lived, her life alongside William and the legacy of the Cartwright family, was being undone before her eyes. She retreated to her office, where she spent hours reviewing documents, trying to understand how to handle the situation. But what surprised her most was Adam's behavior. The young man didn't seem interested in his inheritance. He didn't care about the money he now possessed. He was more concerned with the truth about his mother and about William's life, and this made Eleanor see him in a different light. She was beginning to realize that he wasn't as she had imagined, someone who had simply appeared to take what was hers. He was, in fact, as lost as she was, struggling to find his place in a world that had never truly accepted him. Eleanor decided that, to weather the storm, she needed to get closer to Adam. She invited him to lunch, a simple date, but one that could be a turning point in their relationship. She knew that if they wanted to move forward, they needed to understand what bound them together, not just blood, but the experiences they both shared as victims of the past. Adam, still uncomfortable with the idea of being part of something as grand and complex as the Cartwrights, accepted the invitation. He entered the mansion, still with a heavy heart, but curious to understand more about his new grandmother. When he sat at the table with Eleanor, the glances between them were filled with tension, but also with mutual understanding. They both knew they needed more than just the recognition of a blood tie. They needed to build a relationship that was genuine, without the masks of money and social expectations. Eleanor, looking at Adam, realized he was the reflection of a lost love, a part of her life she would never have back. She knew he wasn't responsible for the secrets William had kept, but at the same time she couldn't ignore the fact that he was a product of a mistake she would now have to deal with. But instead of pushing him away, she felt a need to support him, to be the grandmother he deserved, even if it meant confronting her own insecurities and fears. They talked for hours about Adam's life, his hopes, and what he wanted for the future. Eleanor, though still grappling with the pain of losing William, began to realize that she no longer needed to be the woman who had always been afraid to show weakness. She could be a leader, yes, but she could also be a grandmother, a mother. Adam brought her a renewed faith in life, in the possibility of transformation, not only for him, but also for her. However, for Adam, lunch wasn't just a chance to get closer to Eleanor. He saw in his grandmother a reflection of everything he never had, a family. He began to understand that, even if the Cartwright world was uncomfortable and full of expectations, he also had the right to be a part of it, to shape his own story. He didn't need to be a figure in William's shadow, but could build his own identity within that universe. That afternoon they came to an understanding. William's past, with all its secrets and complications, didn't need to define who they were. They could write a new story together, a story of overcoming not only pain and loss, but also the expectations others had of them. Eleanor, although still in the process of acceptance, began to see Adam not as her husband's lost son, but as someone who was also searching for a purpose, just like her. This encounter was a milestone in both of their evolutions. Eleanor began to let go of the rigidity of her past, the image of a strong and unbreakable woman, to embrace a new perspective on life, more open, more vulnerable. She knew that rebuilding her life wouldn't be easy, but now she had Adam by her side, someone who could help her face the truth and move forward without the lies that had shaped her past. Adam, for his part, also felt a transformation. He began to accept that his heritage, his roots, were part of him, but did not define him. He could be whoever he wanted to be. Life was offering him a second chance, and he no longer wanted to live in the shadow of a man he didn't even truly know. He wanted to be himself, without the shackles of the past, and that more than any wealth or status was what truly mattered to him. Together, Eleanor and Adam began to build a relationship based on trust and mutual understanding. They knew the road ahead would be long, full of challenges and revelations, but now they were ready to face the future without the ghosts of the past. As the truth about William Cartwright and his secret will spread, the tension increased even further. Eleanor, though beginning to find a new perspective on her relationship with Adam, knew there were deeper issues that needed to be resolved. Her daughter Grace, with her relentless ambition, was unwilling to accept losing control over the family inheritance. The pressure to keep the family legacy intact was immense, and the power struggle between mother and daughter was about to reach a boiling point. Grace had begun to devise a strategy, consulting lawyers and influential people to contest William's will. She firmly believed that William's will should not be valid, arguing that he had been influenced by an unknown woman and that the relationship with Adam was not something the Cartwright family should accept. The inheritance, she believed, should remain in the hands of the legitimate family without the threat of a stranger like Adam. The growing animosity between Grace and Eleanor was becoming impossible to ignore. Eleanor, who once fully trusted her daughter to continue the family empire, now saw Grace as a threat. The struggle for control, power, and inheritance had become more than a simple matter of money. It was a battle for identity and loyalty, and most importantly, a dispute over William's legacy. Meanwhile, Adam, who until then had been focused on understanding his connection to the Cartwright family, began to realize that his presence in Eleanor's life was generating an even more complex power dynamic. He didn't want to be a pawn in a game between powerful women, but he couldn't ignore the impact his heritage had on family relationships. He knew that, sooner or later, he would have to take a stand on what he really wanted from his life, but the idea of being manipulated or used as a pawn in a family conflict deeply troubled him. As tensions rose, Eleanor found herself in a dilemma: how to maintain her position without losing her dignity, while simultaneously preserving what remained of her relationship with Adam. She knew that to move forward, she would need to make difficult decisions, including confronting her daughter and deciding what truly mattered to her. Loyalty to her family, the desire to protect Adam, and the future of the Cartwright company were all at stake. Meanwhile, something bigger was about to happen. An even more shocking revelation about the true identity of Adam's mother was beginning to emerge from the shadows. Eleanor, determined to know the whole truth, conducted a secret investigation into William's past. What she discovered horrified her. William not only had an extramarital affair, but he was involved in a much deeper plot involving business matters, family secrets, and even dangers from the criminal underworld. Adam's mother was no ordinary woman. She was connected to a network of influential people who could change everything Eleanor thought she knew about the Cartwright legacy. The revelation began to unfold slowly, with Eleanor discovering that William, in his later years, had engaged in shady dealings that were now coming back to haunt the family. Adam, who until then had thought his involvement with the Cartwrights was merely a matter of inheritance, began to realize he was being pulled into something much bigger. A game of power and danger involving not only the Cartwright family, but also William's allies and enemies, who were now after what had been left behind. Eleanor, with a heavy heart, realized that to protect Adam and his family, she would need to confront the web of influence William had left behind. She knew the battle for control of the inheritance was only beginning, and that she would have to use all her strength to ensure her family wasn't destroyed. But as she began to uncover the intricacies of William's past, she also knew she could no longer hide the truth from Adam. He needed to know what was really at stake. The atmosphere at the Cartwright mansion was tense. Adam's arrival and the revelation of the will had changed everything, but what remained now was to discover how far this family secret could go. The battle for inheritance wouldn't just be a matter of money or status. It was a fight for power, for the truth, and ultimately, for the survival of a family that was about to be torn apart. The clock ticked relentlessly, and Eleanor knew the battle for William Cartwright's legacy was about to reach its climax. The atmosphere in the mansion was thick with tension. Grace, in her quest for power, was no longer willing to yield. She had already called a meeting with lawyers and allies to ensure William's will was contested, arguing that Adam had no right to the inheritance. Eleanor, for her part, was about to make a crucial decision: confront her daughter or succumb to external pressures. That afternoon the phone rang, breaking the heavy silence that hung over the house. It was Michael Stone, the lawyer. Eleanor knew this call would change everything. She answered, her voice firm, but the fear that the situation was about to escalate made her heart beat faster. "Mrs. Cartwright," said Michael with a seriousness that sent a chill down her spine, "there's something you need to know. A new revelation about William's will has just come to light, something that could change the course of this entire dispute." Eleanor, tense, asked him to explain. The lawyer revealed that, in addition to the financial inheritance, the will also left a hidden secret. William had recorded an emotional legacy for Adam, a legacy he had never shared with anyone. In a letter written especially for Adam, William expressed his hope that the young man would use his fortune to restore and rebuild something he himself had destroyed years before: the credibility and respect of the Cartwright family. But the most shocking thing was yet to come. Michael revealed that there was an agreement between William and a secret organization related to shady dealings he had made in the past. That criminal network was eyeing the Cartwright inheritance, and Adam, as the rightful heir, was now the target. The truth about Adam's mother, which Eleanor was beginning to uncover, was linked to these illicit activities. William had never spoken about it, but he knew his family's legacy was in danger. The revelation caused Eleanor deep pain. She wasn't just protecting Adam from a controversial inheritance. Now, she also needed to protect him from far more dangerous enemies. That inheritance wasn't just about money, but a coveted prize for a criminal network willing to do anything to get it. The Cartwright empire was at risk, and Eleanor, who had always been the unbeatable leader, now felt she was about to lose everything, including Adam's life. Eleanor knew that the only way to protect Adam and the Cartwright family was to do the unthinkable. She would have to confront Grace and expose the whole truth. She summoned her daughter to a meeting, hoping to resolve everything once and for all. But what happened at that meeting was not what she expected. Blinded by ambition, Grace refused to accept reality. She believed Eleanor was being manipulated by Adam, and that to secure the family's future, she should seize control of the Cartwright company without further delay. The dispute between mother and daughter reached its peak. The clash between their two worlds, Eleanor's, who wanted to preserve her family and honor, and Grace's, who desired to conquer the empire at any cost, exploded in an exchange of accusations. But amidst the tension, Adam entered the room. He already knew the power struggle was intensifying, but what he didn't know was that the real enemies were closer than he imagined. The revelation that he was being targeted by a criminal network, coupled with the complexities of family relationships, led him to make a decision that would change everyone's fate. With the calm of someone who finally understood what was at stake, Adam stood up and looked at the two women who had dominated his life in opposite ways. The decision to take control of the situation once and for all was his. He knew he couldn't continue being just a spectator in the Cartwrights' game. "I don't need your inheritance," Adam said, his voice firm but resolute. "What I want is a chance to make my own history. If that means pushing the Cartwrights away from me, then that's what I'll do." Eleanor's reaction was one of silent shock. She knew that by saying those words, Adam was not only distancing himself from the inheritance, but also from all the emotional baggage and power that she and William had imposed on him. He was freeing himself, but what he didn't know, and what nobody knew, was that the criminal organization responsible for William's illegal activities was watching his every move. When Adam decided to leave the Cartwright empire, his enemies were ready to act. Danger was closer than ever, and the real battle was only beginning. Adam and Eleanor would be forced to unite to face the unseen enemies that threatened to destroy everything they had. The Cartwright legacy was about to be dismantled, and the only way to survive would be to confront the truth that had been hidden for so long. The story of Adam and Eleanor Cartwright, marked by surprising revelations and family betrayals, was finally reaching its climax. After confronting the truth and dealing with the dark secrets of the past, the two were finally ready to rebuild their lives, but in a way that no one could have predicted. Adam, having distanced himself from his family and inheritance, made a courageous decision. Instead of fighting for the fortune left to him, he chose to follow his own path, far from the shadows of his father and the expectations of the Cartwrights. The struggle for power and inheritance that consumed the family led him to a profound revelation. He didn't want to be a pawn in a game he never belonged to. True freedom lay in his ability to choose his own story without the shackles of a legacy that, in reality, represented more pain than pleasure. But Adam's true transformation wasn't just about money or inheritance. He learned to trust himself, to let go of expectations, and to understand that ultimately what he sought was peace and authenticity. By leaving the Cartwright mansion and seeking a simpler life, he finally found a purpose that gave him genuine happiness. He knew that his connection with Eleanor, though marked by pain and disappointment, was the foundation for a future relationship, free from the secrets and intrigues that surrounded it. Eleanor, for her part, went through a painful but profoundly personal growth process. The revelation of William's past and the confrontation with her daughter Grace forced her to reassess who she really was and what she wanted for the future. For years, she had lived under the pressure of keeping the Cartwright empire intact, but this internal struggle was corroding her. As she learned to cope with the truth about her husband and daughter, she began to realize that her true strength lay not in maintaining control, but in accepting change and vulnerability. Eleanor no longer wished to maintain the empire. She longed to reconnect with the more human side of her family and with the truth she had denied for so long. Although the battle for the inheritance was over, Eleanor knew that the future would be shaped by the choices she and Adam made. Her relationship with Grace, which had become irreparably scarred by the power struggle, might never be the same. But at least Eleanor now understood what truly mattered: her inner peace and her ability to build something genuine with Adam, free from the external influences that had corrupted the Cartwright family history. While Adam left in search of his new life, Eleanor stayed behind, hoping that the next generation could learn from the mistakes of the past. She didn't know what the future held for them, But she was willing to face any challenge, now with the strength of someone who had learned to reinvent herself. The Cartwright Empire, with its secrets, wealth and power, was beginning to crumble. But, in a way, this was what everyone needed to finally be free. And so, with the weight of the revelations finally falling on the shoulders of the Cartwrights, Eleanor and Adam moved forward, knowing that more than any inheritance, what mattered was the legacy of courage, truth, and transformation that they had finally created. Years later, Adam found his peace. Far from the Cartwright Empire, he opened a small business, something he truly loved, and built a quiet life. His relationship with Eleanor flourished, but without the burdens of the past. They became friends and, in a way, family, knowing that together they had overcome the adversities that had united them. William's legacy, though lost, left room for true freedom, the freedom to be who they truly were, without the weight of an inheritance that in the end could never define them. If you've made it this far, we know this story of twists and turns and self-discovery has touched something deep within you. The truth always comes out, but what matters is how we choose to deal with it. What would you do if you were Adam or Eleanor? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge what we think is possible. Join us and continue following stories of overcoming adversity, mysteries, and the search for truth.